My son looked me in the eyes and told me to get lost from my own home. So I did exactly what he asked, but what I took with me left him and his mistress standing in an empty shell. I'm grateful you're here to listen to my story. Stay until the end and comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far this reaches. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every shade of heartbreak life could paint. I buried my husband Theodore 5 years ago after 42 years of marriage. I raised 3 children, survived breast cancer twice, and weathered the kind of storms that either break you or forge you into something unshakable. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day my own son would make me feel like an unwanted stranger in the home I'd lived in for 35 years. My name is Margaret Thornhill, though everyone who knows me calls me Maggie. The house in question sits on Willowbrook Lane in Riverside Heights, a neighborhood where oak trees line the streets and front porches still have rocking chairs that actually get used. Theodore and I bought the property in 1990 when it was just a modest 3-bedroom ranch with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds. Over 3.5 decades, we transformed it into something special. Theodore built the wraparound porch with his own hands one summer, taking time off from his job as a civil engineer to make my dream a reality. We added a sunroom where I could watch the seasons change. We renovated the kitchen twice, the second time after I won a small settlement from a car accident and insisted we do it right. We planted the garden that became my sanctuary, roses, hydrangeas, a vegetable patch that still produces tomatoes every July. Every nail, every paint color, every flowering bush carried a memory. This wasn't just a house. It was the physical embodiment of a life well lived. After Theodore passed from a sudden heart attack, the silence in those rooms became deafening. I'd find myself setting 2 coffee cups out of habit, or turning to tell him something before remembering he was gone. My daughter, Patricia, lived 3 states away with her family. My youngest, Michael, was stationed overseas with the military. But my middle child, my son Derek, was only an hour away in the city. Derek had just gone through a devastating divorce. His ex-wife, Claire, had left him for her personal trainer after 15 years of marriage. Derek was 38, emotionally shattered, and suddenly single in a city where rent consumed most of his paycheck. When he showed up at my door one rainy October evening with his belongings in the back of a U-Haul, his eyes red from crying, what kind of mother would turn him away? Just for a few months, Mom, he'd promised, standing on the porch Theodore built while rain dripped from his hair. Just until I get back on my feet. I can't afford my own place right now, not with the divorce settlement and legal fees. That was 2 years and 3 months ago. At first, having Derek home felt like a gift disguised as necessity. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. We'd have coffee together in the mornings at the kitchen table, him scrolling through work emails while I read the newspaper the old-fashioned way. We'd watch old movies on Friday nights. He introduced me to shows I'd never heard of, and I made him sit through classics he'd somehow never seen. I finally had someone to cook for again, someone who appreciated my pot roast and asked for seconds of my apple pie. Derek worked as a regional sales manager for Crestview Telecommunications, a job that required frequent travel to various cities throughout the Midwest. He'd be gone 3 or 4 days a week, but he always came home with stories about his trips, funny anecdotes about difficult clients, or little gifts he'd picked up for me, a refrigerator magnet from Milwaukee, specialty tea from Minneapolis, a bookmark from Chicago. During those first 18 months, we found a new rhythm as adults sharing space. He helped with things around the house that had become difficult for me, changing the hard-to-reach light bulbs, cleaning the gutters, moving heavy furniture when I wanted to rearrange a room. I did his laundry, made sure he had home-cooked meals, and listened when he needed to talk about the pain of his failed marriage. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, or so I thought. Everything changed when he met Vanessa Carmichael. She appeared in our lives about 8 months ago, introduced into Derek's world through a work connection. Vanessa was 29 years old, a real estate agent with Lancaster and Associates, one of the more aggressive agencies in the area. She had platinum blonde hair that looked professionally maintained every single week, a wardrobe that seemed to consist entirely of designer labels, and an Instagram account with over 40,000 followers that she managed like a second full-time job. Derek was completely smitten from their very first date. "Mom, you have to meet her," He'd gushed that first week, showing me photos on his phone while we sat in the living room. She's incredible. So ambitious, so driven, so clear about what she wants from life. And she's beautiful, I mean, look at her. I looked at the photos he eagerly displayed. Vanessa posed in every single one, by a luxury car, in front of expensive restaurants, holding champagne glasses at what looked like upscale events. Everything about her presentation screamed carefully curated image, but I kept those observations to myself. Derek was happy for the first time since his divorce, and I wasn't about to rain on his parade with a mother's intuition. She's very pretty, I said diplomatically. When do I get to meet her? This weekend. I'm bringing her for Sunday dinner if that's okay. That first meeting should have set off every alarm bell in my mind, but I was too focused on being welcoming to see the warning signs clearly. Vanessa arrived that Sunday dressed like she was attending a yacht club brunch rather than a casual family dinner. White designer jeans, a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, heels that clicked authoritatively against my hardwood floors. She air-kissed both my cheeks without actually making contact, leaving me enveloped in a cloud of expensive perfume that made my eyes water. Mrs. Thornhill, Derek has told me so much about you, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. What a charming home you have. Charming. The word felt dismissive somehow, like calling a child's drawing cute. Throughout dinner, Vanessa barely touched the food I'd spent hours preparing. She pushed the pot roast around her plate while checking her phone repeatedly, apologizing each time with, sorry, work emergency, or client situation. She asked polite questions about my life. How long had I lived here? What did I do before retirement? Did I have other children? But I could tell she was asking out of social obligation rather than genuine interest. What disturbed me more was the way she looked at my house. Her eyes constantly roamed, assessing, calculating. She'd pause mid-conversation to examine a window frame or study the ceiling height or glance toward the property line visible through the dining room window. You have quite a bit of land here, she observed at one point. Almost half an acre? Mrs. Thornhill, Derek has told me so much about you, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. What a charming home you have. Charming. The word felt dismissive somehow, like calling a child's drawing cute. Throughout dinner, Vanessa barely touched the food I'd spent hours preparing. She pushed the pot roast around her plate while checking her phone repeatedly, apologizing each time with, sorry, work emergency, or client situation. She asked polite questions about my life. How long had I lived here? What did I do before retirement? Did I have other children? But I could tell she was asking out of social obligation rather than genuine interest. What disturbed me more was the way she looked at my house. Her eyes constantly roamed, assessing, calculating. She'd pause mid-conversation to examine a window frame or study the ceiling height or glance toward the property line visible through the dining room window. You have quite a bit of land here, she observed at one point. Almost half an acre? Just over, I confirmed. Theodore and I wanted space for a garden. Land like this in Riverside Heights is incredibly valuable, she said, and something in her tone made my skin prickle. Especially this close to downtown. Properties in this neighborhood are selling for astronomical prices. You're sitting on quite an investment, Mrs. Thornhill. I smiled politely, but the comment left me unsettled. I wasn't sitting on an investment. I was living in my home. After that first meeting, Vanessa became a fixture in Derek's life, which meant she became a fixture in mine. She started appearing at the house 2 or 3 times a week, then 4 or 5 times. Derek would bring her home after work, or they'd show up together on weekends. Each visit brought new observations about the house, always framed as professional insight from her real estate expertise. These original hardwood floors are beautiful, but they're showing their age, she'd comment, walking through my living room. Refinishing would cost about $8,000, but it would add significant value. The kitchen is nice, but granite countertops are out now. Everyone wants quartz or marble. This would need updating to appeal to modern buyers. That wallpaper in the hallway is very nostalgic. Most people would want to tear it down and repaint. The wallpaper in question was hand-selected by Theodore and me during our 20th anniversary trip to a design center 3 hours away. We'd spent an entire Saturday looking at samples, debating patterns, imagining how it would transform the space. Putting it up had been a weekend project that turned into a week-long adventure of laughter, mistakes, and finally, triumph. Every time I walked down that hallway, I saw Theodore standing on the ladder, making jokes about his lack of interior design skills while I directed him from below. But to Vanessa, it was just outdated decor that needed to be removed. Derek started echoing her assessments. My son, who had helped me choose the paint color for the sunroom, who had spent a summer helping Theodore build garden boxes, was suddenly looking at our home through Vanessa's cold, appraising eyes. You know, Mom, she has a point about the kitchen, he said one morning about 4 months into their relationship. It's nice, but it is getting dated. If you ever wanted to sell, you'd need to update it. I'm not selling, I reminded him gently. This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. He'd looked at me oddly then, like I'd said something confusing, but he didn't push the subject. Not yet. The real transformation in our household dynamic began about 3 months ago when Vanessa essentially moved in without ever explicitly asking permission or even discussing it with me. It started innocuously enough. She left a toothbrush in the bathroom after staying over one weekend. Then a few toiletries appeared, expensive face creams and serums that took up half the bathroom counter. Then clothes began migrating into Derek's closet. Then she had a corner of the dining room table designated as her workspace, where she'd sit for hours on her laptop, taking calls with clients and typing aggressively while I tried to stay out of her way in my own home. Before I fully understood what was happening, Vanessa was eating breakfast at my table every single morning, scrolling through her phone with her other hand wrapped around the coffee I'd made, rarely acknowledging my presence beyond a disinterested morning, if I was lucky. I tried to be welcoming. I'd make enough breakfast for 3, set out plates, attempt conversation. Good morning, Vanessa. How did you sleep? Fine, she'd respond without looking up from her phone. I made scrambled eggs and toast if you're hungry. I don't eat bread. Too many carbs. There's fresh fruit as well. These exchanges, or rather non-exchanges, became our morning routine. I'd cook, she'd ignore me, Derek would try to mediate by filling the silence with cheerful small talk that felt increasingly forced. Patricia called one evening during this period, and I made the mistake of mentioning the situation. Wait, she moved in? My daughter asked incredulously. Into your house? Did Derek ask you? Not exactly, I admitted. It just kind of happened gradually. Mom, that's your house. You get to decide who lives there. I don't want to cause problems between Derek and me. He seems happy with her. Happy doesn't give him the right to move his girlfriend into your home without discussing it with you first. You need to set boundaries. But setting boundaries felt impossible. Every time I considered saying something, I'd see Derek's face, remember how broken he'd been after his divorce, recall how I'd promised to always be there for him. What kind of mother would I be to make his life harder when he'd finally found happiness again? So I stayed silent, even as my home began to feel less and less like my own. Vanessa's criticism of the house intensified as she became more comfortable. Real estate magazines started appearing on the coffee table, always open to articles with titles like Downsizing for Seniors, A Complete Guide, or Retirement Community Living, Freedom from Home Maintenance, or When It's Time to Let Go of the Family Home. She'd make comments that felt like they were designed to plant seeds of doubt in my mind about my capability to maintain my own property. This yard is so much work, isn't it, Maggie? She'd say, watching me tend to my roses. All this bending and kneeling can't be good for your joints at your age. Wouldn't it be nice to not have to worry about lawn care and garden maintenance? Or, these stairs must be getting harder to manage. My grandmother fell in her home last year. It's so dangerous for older people living alone in multi-level houses. The house was a ranch, it didn't have a second story. But Vanessa's point wasn't about actual safety concerns. She was building a narrative where I was too old, too incapable, too much of a liability to continue living independently in my own home. Derek seemed oblivious to her passive-aggressive campaign. Or perhaps he chose to be oblivious because acknowledging it would require him to confront his girlfriend about her treatment of his mother. The suggestions about assisted living facilities started casually, dropped into conversations like they were helpful observations rather than pointed attacks. "You know, Maggie," Vanessa said one Saturday morning, again using my first name with a familiarity she'd never earned and that felt deliberately disrespectful coming from someone young enough to be my daughter, "there are some wonderful senior communities in the area. My grandmother lives at Sunset Meadows, and she absolutely loves it. No maintenance, social activities, medical support right on site. You'd have so much less to worry about." I was 70, not 90. I was healthy, active, mentally sharp, and perfectly capable of managing my own home and life. But Vanessa spoke to me like I was already 1 foot in a nursing home, too feeble to understand what was best for myself. And Derek, my son, the boy I'd raised to stand up for what was right, the man I'd taught to respect his elders, sat silently during these exchanges. He'd shift uncomfortably sometimes, or change the subject, but he never defended me. He never told his girlfriend that she was out of line, that she was disrespecting his mother, that her suggestions were inappropriate and hurtful. His silence hurt more than Vanessa's words. Michael called from his base overseas one evening, and I found myself breaking down as I told him what was happening. "Mom, this is insane," he said, his voice crackling through the international connection. "You need to kick them out. It's your house. I can't do that to your brother. Where would he go? That's not your problem. He's a grown man with a job. He can figure it out. You don't owe him your house. I'm not giving him my house. Vanessa just makes comments. It's not like they're forcing me out." "Yet," Michael said darkly. "Mom, I've seen this before. People start with suggestions, then pressure, then demands. You need to shut this down now before it goes any further." But I didn't know how to shut it down without destroying my relationship with my son. And despite everything, despite the disrespect and the uncomfortable living situation, Derek was still my child. I'd raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him. Surely that counted for something. Surely he wouldn't actually try to take my home from me. I was naive. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening in late September, 3 weeks before I'm telling you this story now. The weather had just started to turn, that perfect autumn coolness that makes you want to light candles and cook comfort food. I'd spent the entire day preparing a special dinner, Derek's favorite pot roast with roasted vegetables, the same recipe his grandmother used to make, passed down through 3 generations of Thornhill women. I'd gone to the farmer's market that morning to get the freshest ingredients. I'd set the table with the good china that Theodore and I had received as a wedding gift, plates we only used for special occasions. I'd lit candles, bought a nice bottle of red wine, even put fresh flowers from my garden in a vase as a centerpiece. I wanted us to sit down as a family and talk, really talk, about the growing tension in the house. Maybe if we had an honest conversation in a warm, comfortable setting, we could address the issues and find a way forward that worked for everyone. Maybe Derek would finally hear what I'd been too afraid to say directly. Maybe Vanessa would understand that her comments hurt me, and we could establish better boundaries moving forward. I texted Derek that morning, "Special dinner tonight at 6:30. Your favorite pot roast. Please be home. Important we all talk." He'd responded with a thumbs up emoji, which I took as confirmation. By 6:15, the house smelled incredible. The pot roast was perfect, the vegetables were roasted to golden perfection, the wine was breathing, the table looked beautiful. I'd even baked an apple pie for dessert, another family recipe that Derek had always loved. I waited. 6:30 came and went. No Derek, no Vanessa. 6:45, still nothing. I texted, "Dinner is ready. Are you close?" No response. 7 o'clock, the food was starting to cool. I covered everything to keep it warm and tried calling. It went straight to voicemail. At 7:30, I finally heard the front door open. Relief washed over me, they were just running late, probably caught in traffic. We could still have our dinner, still have our conversation. But the moment I saw them walk in, I knew something was wrong. Derek and Vanessa were laughing, relaxed, clearly in good moods. And they were carrying takeout bags from Salvatore's, an expensive Italian restaurant downtown. My heart sank into my stomach. "Oh," Vanessa said when she saw me standing in the kitchen doorway, not even having the grace to look apologetic. "Were we supposed to be home for dinner?" "I texted Derek this morning," I said, my voice barely steady. "I've been cooking all day." "Your favorite pot roast," I added, looking at my son. Derek had the decency to look uncomfortable, pulling out his phone and checking his messages. "Sorry, Mom. I guess I forgot. Vanessa wanted to try this new place, and I didn't check my texts." "You didn't check?" I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He hadn't checked his messages all day? Or he'd seen my text and simply ignored it? "Well, you could still sit with me," I suggested, hating how small and pleading my voice sounded. "Keep me company while I eat. We need to talk anyway." Vanessa sighed dramatically, the kind of exaggerated sigh a teenager makes when asked to do household chores. "Actually, Margaret, Derek and I need to discuss something with you. This timing is perfect, actually. Might as well get it over with." Get it over with. Like talking to me was an unpleasant task to check off a list. Something in her tone made my skin go cold. Derek and Vanessa exchanged a look, the kind of look that passes between people who've discussed something extensively in private and are now ready to execute their plan. Derek nodded at her, a small gesture of permission that felt like a betrayal before he'd even spoken a word. They sat down at my carefully set table, but neither of them touched the food I'd spent hours preparing. The candles I'd lit flickered between us, romantic ambience turned into surreal nightmare lighting. Vanessa folded her hands on the table in front of her like she was chairing a business meeting. When she spoke, her voice had that practiced, professional quality that real estate agents use when delivering bad news to clients. "Margaret, Derek and I have been discussing our future together, and we need to have a practical conversation about our living situation moving forward." I looked at my son, waiting for him to take over the conversation. This was his mother, his childhood home, his family. Surely he would be the one to discuss their plans, not his girlfriend of 8 months who'd invaded my space without permission. But Derek just sat there, hands clasped in his lap, letting Vanessa do the talking. "As you know, Derek and I are getting quite serious," she continued, and I noticed this was the first I was hearing about just how serious. "We're planning to get married next spring. Nothing too extravagant, probably a destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas. I've already been looking at venues." She paused, waiting for me to congratulate them or express excitement. I remained silent, a growing sense of dread building in my chest. When I didn't respond, she pressed forward. "Obviously, as a married couple, we'll need our own space. A proper home to start our life together and build a family." "Of course," I managed to say. "I'm sure you'll find a lovely place." Vanessa smiled, but it was the smile of a shark that's just spotted prey. "Actually, we already have. This house is absolutely perfect for our needs." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" "This house," Vanessa repeated, speaking slowly like I was hard of hearing or intellectually impaired. "It's exactly what Derek and I need. 4 bedrooms, perfect for starting a family. Large yard, ideal for children and dogs. Established neighborhood, great schools nearby. And the location is prime. We couldn't design a better property for our future if we tried." My mouth had gone dry. I reached for my water glass with a trembling hand. "Vanessa, this is my home. And it's been wonderful for you," she said with fake sympathy that made my stomach turn. "You and Theodore built a beautiful life here, raised your children, created lovely memories. But Margaret, be honest with yourself, that chapter is over now. You're living in the past, surrounded by things meant for a family you no longer have here. Theodore is gone. Your children are grown and scattered. You're living alone in a 4-bedroom house that's far too large and too expensive for one elderly person to maintain. Elderly person. The term felt deliberately chosen to diminish me, to paint me as helpless and incapable. I maintain it just fine, I said, my voice stronger now despite the shock flooding my system. This house is not too large for me. It's my home. For now, Vanessa continued as if I hadn't spoken. But you need to think practically about the future. You're 70 years old. How much longer can you really handle yard work, home repairs, property maintenance? What happens when you can't manage the stairs to the basement anymore? What happens when you fall and there's no one here to help you? Again with the stairs, the house was one level except for the basement, which I rarely needed to access. Vanessa has a point, Mom, Derek finally spoke, his voice quiet but supportive of everything his girlfriend was saying. This house is a lot for you. We've noticed you struggling with certain things. What things? I demanded, looking at my son. What exactly have I been struggling with? He shifted uncomfortably. Well, the lawn care for one. You hired someone to mow this summer. I've hired someone to mow for the past 5 years. My arthritis makes pushing the mower difficult, so I pay a local teenager to do it. That's called delegating, not struggling. And the gutters, Vanessa added. You mentioned needing them cleaned last month. Which I arranged to have done. Just like millions of homeowners do every fall. But I could see my protests weren't landing. They'd already constructed their narrative, one where I was failing to maintain my property, where I was in over my head, where I desperately needed to be rescued from the burden of homeownership. This house is far too large for one person at your stage of life, Vanessa pressed on, her voice taking on a harder edge now. It's inefficient, expensive to maintain, and frankly, it's wasted on someone who's already lived the majority of their life. Derek and I are young. We're starting our family. We need this space in a way that you simply don't anymore. Someone who's already lived the majority of their life. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. This woman, this stranger who'd been in my life for less than a year, was telling me that my life was essentially over, that my needs and wants no longer mattered because I'd already had my turn and now it was time to step aside for the younger generation. I stared at Vanessa across my dining room table, her words still echoing in my ears. Someone who's already lived the majority of their life. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This woman, sitting in my home, eating meals I prepared, sleeping under my roof, was telling me that my existence had diminished value because of my age. Vanessa, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, I think you need to reconsider what you're asking. I'm not asking, she replied coolly. I'm trying to have an adult conversation about what makes the most sense for everyone involved. What makes sense for you, you mean? Her eyes flashed with irritation. For Derek. For his future. For the family we're going to build. You should want this for your son, Margaret. What kind of mother stands in the way of her child's happiness? The manipulation was breathtaking. She'd somehow twisted this situation to make me the villain, the selfish mother preventing her son from having the life he deserved, rather than the homeowner being pressured to surrender her property. I turned to Derek, searching his face for some sign that he recognized how outrageous this conversation was. Derek, please tell me you don't actually expect me to give up my home. He wouldn't meet my eyes, instead staring at a spot on the table between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Mom, nobody's saying you have to give it up immediately. We're just asking you to think about it. To consider what's best for everyone. Best for everyone? Derek, this is the house where you grew up. Where we celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone in your life. Where your father built that porch with his own hands. Where we planted trees when each of you children were born. You're asking me to walk away from all of that so you and your girlfriend can play house? It's not playing house, Derek's voice rose defensively. We're getting married. We're starting a real life together. And yes, Mom, I grew up here, but those are my memories too. This house means something to me as well. Why should it just sit here with you rattling around in it alone when Vanessa and I could actually use it? Rattling around. Like I was some insignificant ghost haunting rooms that had no purpose anymore. I'm not rattling around anywhere, I said, my voice shaking now with anger and hurt. I'm living. This is my home. I garden, I read in the sunroom your father built for me, I cook in the kitchen we renovated together, I sleep in the bedroom where we spent 42 years of marriage. Every corner of this house holds pieces of my life, and you're asking me to abandon it because it would be convenient for you? Vanessa sighed dramatically, pulling out her phone. I was hoping we could have a reasonable conversation about this, but I can see you're being emotional rather than practical. Let me show you something. She swiped through her phone with practiced efficiency, then turned the screen toward me. It showed a listing for Sunset Meadows Retirement Community. Studio apartment starting at $1,800 a month, she read aloud. All utilities included, weekly housekeeping, 3 meals a day in the community dining room, organized social activities, on-site medical staff, transportation services. Margaret, this is exactly what you need. No more worrying about lawn care, home repairs, cooking, cleaning, everything would be taken care of for you. I don't want everything taken care of for me. I want my own home. You want to cling to the past, Vanessa snapped, her professional veneer finally cracking to reveal the cold calculation beneath. You want to live in memories while the rest of us try to build actual futures. That's selfish, Margaret. Deeply, profoundly selfish. I felt like I'd been slapped. Selfish? You're trying to take my house, and I'm the selfish one? Yes. Vanessa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Derek has done everything for you. After his father died. Theodore, I interrupted sharply. His name was Theodore. After Theodore died, she continued with barely concealed irritation, Derek put his own life on hold to come back here and take care of you. He's been living in this house for over 2 years, making sure you're not alone, helping with everything you can't manage on your own anymore. The least you could do, the absolute bare minimum, is help him start his new life properly instead of forcing him to keep babysitting his elderly mother. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I looked at Derek, waiting for him to correct her gross mischaracterization of the past 2 years. Waiting for him to remind her that he'd come home because he needed a place to stay after his divorce, not because I needed taking care of. Waiting for him to defend me, to tell his girlfriend that she was completely out of line. But Derek said nothing. He just sat there, staring at the table, his silence serving as tacit agreement with everything Vanessa had said. Is that how you see it? I asked my son quietly. You've been babysitting me? Derek finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke something fundamental inside me. It wasn't remorse or conflict or even discomfort. It was resignation mixed with impatience, the expression of someone who'd been dreading this conversation but was relieved to finally have it out in the open. Mom, I didn't want to put it that way, but, yeah. Kind of. I came back because you needed someone here after Dad died. You were a mess. You couldn't function on your own. That's not true, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was grieving, yes. But I never asked you to come home. You showed up because you needed a place to stay after Claire left you. See, this is what you do, Derek said, his voice rising now. You rewrite history to make yourself the victim. Yes, I was going through a divorce. Yes, I needed a place to stay temporarily. But you were falling apart, Mom. You were crying all the time, you'd stopped taking care of yourself, you were lost without Dad. I stayed because you needed me, and I've been here for you ever since. 2 years of my life, put on hold, so you wouldn't be alone. I stared at my son, watching him reconstruct the past with such conviction that I wondered if he actually believed his own revision. Yes, I'd been grieving Theodore. Yes, there had been difficult days when getting out of bed felt impossible. But I'd been functioning. I'd been managing. And Derek's presence, while appreciated, had never been presented as a caretaking arrangement. It had been a temporary solution to his own housing crisis. If you felt like you were sacrificing so much by being here, I said carefully, why didn't you move out once you got back on your feet financially? Because you still needed me, he said, but there was something defensive in his tone now. And honestly, Mom, I was comfortable here. But now things are different. I'm getting married. I need to start my own life, in my own home. Then find your own home, I said. Buy something, rent something, but this house is mine. Vanessa laughed, actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that filled the dining room. Buy something? Have you seen the real estate market? Homes in Riverside Heights are selling for $750,000 to $900,000. Derek and I would need a massive down payment, and even then, the mortgage would be astronomical. Why should we struggle to buy something when this house is just sitting here, wasted on someone who doesn't even need it? I do need it, I said firmly. It's my home. You need a roof over your head and someone to make sure you take your medications, Vanessa shot back. You don't need 4 bedrooms and half an acre of property. That's not need, that's greed. You're hoarding space and resources that should go to people who can actually use them productively. The economic argument was almost funny in its audacity. She was calling me greedy for wanting to keep my own home while simultaneously demanding I hand it over to her. Vanessa's right, Mom, Derek said, and hearing him agree with her toxic logic felt like a knife twisting in my chest. You don't use most of this house. When was the last time you even went into the guest bedrooms? Or used the formal dining room? You live in basically 3 rooms, your bedroom, the kitchen, and the living room. The rest is just empty space that needs heating and cooling and maintenance. It's wasteful. It's my waste to make, I said. My house, my choice. But it affects all of us, Vanessa interjected. This house should be part of Derek's inheritance. You're essentially spending his inheritance maintaining a property you don't need instead of downsizing and preserving that wealth for your children's future. I blinked at her, stunned by the sheer entitlement. You're talking about my inheritance while I'm still alive? While I'm sitting right here in front of you? Someone has to think practically about these things, she said with infuriating calmness. Estate planning is important, Margaret. You should be working with Derek to ensure smooth transfers of assets, minimizing tax burdens, protecting family wealth. Instead, you're clinging to a house that's losing value every year you fail to update it, costing money in maintenance and utilities, and preventing your son from building equity in his own future. I turned to Derek again, desperate for him to recognize how twisted this conversation had become. Do you hear what she's saying? She's talking about estate planning and inheritance while I'm 70 years old and in perfect health. She's acting like I'm already dead. No one's saying that, Derek said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. We're just trying to be smart about the future. And Mom, you have to admit, you're not getting any younger. What happens if you get sick? Or have a fall? Or develop dementia like Grandma did? We need to have plans in place for those possibilities. Plans that apparently involve you taking ownership of my house before any of those things actually happen. Derek's jaw tightened. Why are you making this so difficult? We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone would respect the fact that this is my property and my decision, I said. What you're describing isn't a solution, it's a hostile takeover disguised as family planning. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. This is exactly why adult children struggle with aging parents. You refuse to accept reality. You refuse to make reasonable accommodations for the next generation. You want to control everything until the day you die, regardless of how it impacts your family. My family? I repeated. You've known my son for 8 months, Vanessa. You're not my family. And even if you were, family doesn't pressure elderly relatives to surrender their homes. I'm about to be his wife, she hissed. That makes me your family whether you like it or not. And as Derek's wife, I have a right to advocate for our future, for our financial security, for our ability to build the life we want. You had your turn, Margaret. You had 42 years of marriage, 3 children, decades in this house. You've lived your life. Now it's our turn, and you need to get out of the way. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Derek looked shocked by Vanessa's bluntness, though not shocked enough to contradict her. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking but my resolve hardening with each passing second. Get out. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me? Get out of my house. Right now. Mom, Derek started, but I held up my hand. Not you, Derek. You live here, at least for now. But Vanessa needs to leave immediately. Vanessa laughed incredulously. You can't kick me out. Derek invited me here. Derek doesn't own this house. I do. And I'm telling you to leave. She looked at Derek expectantly, waiting for him to override my decision, to take her side, to assert some kind of authority he didn't actually have. And to my absolute horror, he tried. Mom, you're overreacting, Derek said, standing up. Vanessa is my fiancée. You can't just throw her out because you don't like hearing the truth. The truth? I repeated. The truth is that this woman has been in my home for less than a year and is demanding that I surrender it to her. The truth is that she's been systematically undermining me, questioning my competence, pressuring me to move into a retirement community so she can take over my property. The truth is that she just told me I've lived my life and need to get out of the way for the younger generation. And the truth, Derek, is that you've been sitting here agreeing with every toxic, disrespectful, manipulative thing she said. I'm trying to think about my future, he said defensively. At the expense of my present, I shot back. This is my home. I'm not leaving it, I'm not signing it over, and I'm not going to spend another minute being disrespected in my own house. Vanessa, get out. Now. Vanessa stood up, grabbing her expensive purse from the back of her chair. Fine. I'll leave. But this conversation isn't over, Margaret. Derek and I have consulted with lawyers about the best way to handle situations like this. There are options, legal options, for families dealing with elderly relatives who can't make sound decisions about their own welfare. The threat was barely veiled. She was suggesting they could pursue some kind of legal action to declare me incompetent or unable to manage my own affairs. Are you threatening me? I asked quietly. I'm informing you of reality, Vanessa said coldly. You think you hold all the power because your name is on the deed, but there are ways to address situations where aging parents become obstacles to their adult children's well-being. Elder care laws exist for exactly these kinds of circumstances. Elder care laws are designed to protect elderly people from abuse and exploitation, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. Not to help entitled adults steal their parents' property. We'll see about that, Vanessa said. She looked at Derek. Are you coming with me or staying with her? It was a test, a power play, forcing Derek to choose sides in front of both of us. I held my breath, praying that my son would choose his mother, would finally see how toxic this woman was, would recognize that what they were asking of me was cruel and wrong. But Derek grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. I'll drive you home, he said to Vanessa. Then, to me, Mom, we'll talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmed down. You need to think seriously about what we've discussed. This isn't going away. They left together, Vanessa's heels clicking triumphantly against my hardwood floors as they walked out. The front door closed with a definitive thud that echoed through the suddenly empty house. I stood in my dining room, surrounded by the dinner I'd spent all day preparing, candles still burning uselessly on a table no one had eaten at, and finally let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son had chosen his girlfriend of 8 months over his mother. He'd listened to her demand that I surrender my home and hadn't just failed to defend me, he'd actively supported her position. He'd threatened me with lawyers and legal action. He'd rewritten our history to paint himself as my caretaker rather than acknowledging that he'd been the one who needed help. And worst of all, he'd walked out with her, leaving me alone with the clear message that their relationship was more important than ours. I sank into my chair and stared at the cold pot roast I'd made with so much hope. The wine I'd bought to celebrate family togetherness sat unopened. The apple pie cooling on the counter would go uneaten. I'd planned this evening as a bridge back to understanding, but instead, it had become the moment when whatever remained of my relationship with Derek finally shattered beyond repair. The tears came then, hot, bitter tears of grief and rage and betrayal. I cried for the son I'd raised who had somehow become a man I didn't recognize. I cried for Theodore, wishing desperately that he was here to help me navigate this nightmare. I cried for my home, my sanctuary, now tainted by the ugly confrontation that had taken place within its walls. But underneath the grief, something else was growing. Something harder and colder than tears. Anger. Pure, righteous, clarifying anger. How dare they? How dare my son and his entitled girlfriend sit in my home and tell me my life was over, that I needed to step aside for the younger generation, that I was being selfish for wanting to keep my own property. How dare they threaten me with lawyers and twisted interpretations of elder care laws? How dare they treat me like an obstacle to be removed rather than a person deserving of respect and dignity? I wiped my eyes and stood up, moving through my house with new purpose. I went to Theodore's study, I still called it that even though he'd been gone for 5 years, and pulled out the filing cabinet where we'd kept all our important documents. Property deed. There it was, in my name alone. Theodore had insisted on that after his brother's messy divorce had shown him how complicated joint property ownership could become. Your security, he'd called it. No matter what happens, you'll always have the house. I held the deed in my hands, studying the official notary stamps and signatures. This house was mine, legally, unambiguously, completely mine. Derek had no claim to it, no ownership stake, no legal standing whatsoever. He was an adult child living in his parents' home, nothing more. But Vanessa's threat about elder care laws nagged at me. Could they actually pursue something like that? Could they try to have me declared incompetent or unable to manage my own affairs? I spent the next hour researching online, reading through legal websites and forum discussions about adult children and elderly parents. What I found was both reassuring and disturbing. Reassuring because the legal bar for declaring someone incompetent was extremely high. They would need medical evidence, psychiatric evaluations, proof of my inability to manage basic life functions. Being 70 years old and wanting to keep my house didn't meet any definition of incompetence. Disturbing because I also found stories, dozens of them, about adult children who'd found ways to manipulate the system. Power of attorney documents signed under pressure. Medical professionals who'd write whatever diagnosis paid them enough. Legal proceedings that dragged on for years, draining savings and destroying families. I thought about Vanessa's comment about consulting lawyers. Had they really done that, or was it just a threat meant to scare me? And if they had consulted lawyers, what exactly had they discussed? Derek didn't come home that night. I waited up until midnight, watching headlights pass by on Willowbrook Lane, hoping each one would turn into my driveway. But he stayed away, choosing Vanessa over any attempt to repair what had broken between us. I finally went to bed around 1 a.m., but sleep came in fitful bursts interrupted by anxiety and racing thoughts. Every creak of the house settling made me jump, imagining Derek returning with lawyers or police or some other threat I hadn't anticipated. When morning finally came, gray and drizzly, I felt exhausted but determined. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Vanessa had eaten my food while plotting to take my home, and started making a list. First, I needed legal advice from someone I could trust. My estate lawyer had handled Theodore's will, but this was different. I needed someone who specialized in property rights and family disputes. Second, I needed to understand my financial situation completely. If this turned into a legal battle, I'd need resources. If Derek decided to make my life difficult, I needed to know what I could afford. Third, I needed to secure my house. Change the locks? That seemed extreme, but after last night, I wasn't sure what Derek might do. He still had a key. He could come and go as he pleased. And now he'd aligned himself with someone who viewed my property as rightfully theirs. Fourth, I needed to tell Patricia and Michael what was happening. My other children deserved to know that their brother was trying to force me out of my home. I was working through my second cup of coffee and adding items to my list when I heard a key in the front door. My heart started pounding. Derek was back. He walked into the kitchen looking tired, his clothes rumpled like he'd slept in them. For just a moment, I saw my son the way he used to be, vulnerable, uncertain, needing his mother. But then he spoke, and the illusion shattered. "We need to talk, Mom." "I agree," I said calmly, though my hands were shaking around my coffee cup. "You can start by apologizing for everything that was said last night." Derek pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "I'm not apologizing. Vanessa and I meant everything we said. But we could have said it better, more gently. I know this is hard for you to hear." "Hard for me to hear?" I repeated. "Derek, your girlfriend told me I've lived my life and need to get out of the way. She threatened me with legal action. She called me selfish for wanting to keep my own home. And you sat there agreeing with her." "Because she's right," Derek said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. "Maybe she was too blunt, but the core message is right. This house is wasted on you, Mom. You don't need it. Vanessa and I do. And yes, that makes you keeping it selfish." I set down my coffee cup before I could throw it. "Get out." "Mom." "No. Get out of my house. Today. Pack your things and leave." Derek's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." "You want to talk about what's wasted?" "My hospitality has been wasted on you. My love, my support, my willingness to help you when you were broken after your divorce, all wasted on someone who sees me as nothing more than an obstacle to his real estate ambitions." "This is my home too," Derek said, his voice rising. "I grew up here. I have just as much right to it as you do." "No, you don't. You have memories here, and those are yours to keep. But you have zero legal right to this property. It's in my name. I own it. And I'm telling you to leave." Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor just like Vanessa's had the night before. "You're making a huge mistake, Mom. Vanessa and I are trying to work with you, to find a solution that respects everyone's needs. But if you force us into a corner, we'll have to pursue other options." "What other options?" I demanded. "More threats about declaring me incompetent?" "Good luck with that, Derek. I'm healthy, mentally sharp, managing my own affairs perfectly well. No judge in the world would look at this situation and side with the adult son trying to steal his mother's house." "We're not trying to steal anything," Derek said through gritted teeth. "We're trying to help you transition to a more appropriate living situation while also securing our own future. But if you won't cooperate voluntarily, there are legal mechanisms." "Stop," I interrupted. "Stop threatening me in my own home. Either pack your things and leave, or I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." "Trespassing?" Derek laughed bitterly. "I live here, Mom. You can't just kick me out on the street." "Actually, I can. You're not on the lease because there is no lease. You're not on the deed. You're a guest in my home, and I'm revoking that invitation. I want you gone by the end of the day." Derek stared at me like he'd never seen me before. "Who are you?" The mom I knew would never treat her son like this. The son I knew would never demand his mother surrender her home, I shot back. The son I knew would never sit silently while his girlfriend disrespected and threatened me. The son I knew would never choose an 8-month relationship over his own mother. So maybe we're both wondering who the other person has become. Derek grabbed his phone and keys from the counter. "Fine. I'll leave. But don't think this is over, Mom. Vanessa's father is a real estate attorney. He's already looked into situations like this. There are options for families dealing with aging parents who won't act in their own best interest." "Options like what?" I asked, my voice cold. "Conservatorship? Guardianships? Good luck proving I need either of those. I manage my own finances, maintain my own home, make my own medical decisions. You have no case." "We'll see," Derek said. He paused at the kitchen doorway, turning back to look at me one more time. "Last chance, Mom. Think about what you're doing. Think about what you're throwing away." "I'm not throwing anything away," I said quietly. You already did that when you chose to side with someone trying to take my home. Now get out. You have until 6 p.m. to pack your things and leave. After that, I'm changing the locks. Derek's face hardened into an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, almost cruel. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret is letting you stay here as long as I did. He left without another word, thundering up the stairs to the bedroom he'd occupied for the past 2 years. I heard drawers opening and closing, the sounds of hasty packing, footsteps heavy with anger moving back and forth across the ceiling above me. I sat at my kitchen table, forcing myself to drink my now cold coffee, refusing to cry. I'd done the right thing. I knew I'd done the right thing. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message that made my blood run cold. This is Vanessa. Derek told me what you said. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. We tried to do this the nice way, but you've chosen to be difficult. Get ready for a legal battle you can't win. By this time next month, you'll be begging us to let you move into Sunset Meadows. Enjoy your house while you still can. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding the threat. Then I screenshot it, saved it to 3 different locations, and sent copies to my email. If this was going to turn into a legal fight, I wanted documentation of every threat, every manipulation, every attempt to intimidate me. Derek came downstairs an hour later with 2 large suitcases and a box of personal items. He set them by the front door and turned to face me. I'm taking what's mine. I'll come back for the rest of my things later this week. No, I said firmly. You'll take everything today, or it goes to donation. You're not coming back here, Derek. Not unless you're ready to apologize and make things right. He laughed humorlessly. Apologize? For what? For having the audacity to want a future? For expecting my mother to help me the way I helped her? You didn't help me, I said tiredly. You helped yourself to free rent and home-cooked meals for 2 years. But I'm done arguing about revisionist history. Take your things and go. Derek made 3 more trips to his car, loading boxes and bags while I watched from the living room window. Each trip felt like watching pieces of my relationship with my son being physically removed from my life. On his final trip, he paused in the doorway. For just a moment, I thought he might say something, might apologize, might recognize how wrong this all was, might remember that he loved me and I loved him despite everything that had happened. Instead, he said, Vanessa's father is filing paperwork on Monday. He thinks we have a strong case for having you evaluated for competency. Apparently, sudden personality changes and irrational decision-making are warning signs of cognitive decline. Kicking out your own son because you don't like his girlfriend? That's textbook erratic behavior from someone who's not thinking clearly. My heart sank. They were really going to do this. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my property and my life. Get lost, Derek, I said quietly, the words falling from my lips before I'd fully formed the thought. He flinched like I'd struck him. What? Get lost, I repeated, louder this time. That's what you want, isn't it? For me to get lost? To disappear into some retirement home and leave my house to you? Well, I'm telling you to get lost instead. Get out of my house, get out of my life, and don't come back until you remember what it means to be a decent human being. Derek's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, hurt, anger, and finally, cold determination. Fine. Have it your way, Mom. But when Vanessa's father is done with you, you won't have a choice about leaving. You'll be evaluated, found mentally unfit to make your own decisions, and placed in assisted care whether you like it or not. And this house, my inheritance, will be preserved for the family that actually deserves it. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I stood in my entryway, in the sudden silence of my empty house, and felt the full weight of what had just happened crash over me. My son was gone. He was really gone. And he was coming back with lawyers and doctors and legal mechanisms designed to strip away my autonomy and take everything I had. I walked through my house in a daze, room by room, touching furniture and walls like I was saying goodbye to old friends. This was my home. Theodore and I had built this life together. I'd raised my children here, buried my husband, survived cancer, endured every storm life had thrown at me, and now I was facing the possibility of losing it all because my son had fallen in love with a woman who saw my property as her future and me as an inconvenient obstacle. But as I walked, something else began to crystallize in my mind. A realization that changed everything. Derek had forgotten one crucial detail in his threats and plans and legal strategies. One oversight that would prove to be his biggest mistake. The house wasn't the only thing I owned. It wasn't even the most valuable thing I owned. And if he wanted to play legal hardball, if he wanted to treat me like an adversary instead of his mother, then he was about to learn exactly what this incompetent old woman was actually capable of. I picked up my phone and made the first call that would change everything. The phone call I made that afternoon would change everything, though I didn't fully understand that yet. I sat in Theodore's study, surrounded by filing cabinets full of our life's documentation, and dialed a number I hadn't called in almost 3 years. Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call? Charlotte Whitmore, please. Tell her it's Margaret Thornhill calling. Charlotte had been Theodore's business partner for nearly 20 years before they'd both retired. She was a real estate developer who'd built half of Riverside Heights, a shrewd businesswoman with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when protecting her interests or those of people she cared about. She was also one of my closest friends, though we drifted apart somewhat after Theodore's death, mostly because seeing her reminded me too painfully of my husband. Maggie? Charlotte's voice came through, warm but surprised. My goodness, it's been too long. How are you? I need help, Charlotte. Legal help. And maybe some advice about real estate. There was a pause. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice had shifted from social to business mode. Tell me everything. I spent the next 40 minutes laying out the entire situation: Derek's return after his divorce, Vanessa's gradual invasion of my home, the dinner confrontation, their demand that I surrender my house, their threats about competency evaluations and legal action. Charlotte listened without interrupting, though I could hear her making occasional notes. When I finished, there was a long silence. Maggie, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you remember what Theodore set up in the years before he died? I frowned, confused by the question. What do you mean? The trust. The investment portfolio. The properties. My confusion deepened. Charlotte, what are you talking about? Theodore had a will, yes, and some retirement savings, but... Oh my God, Charlotte breathed. You don't know. Maggie, did you ever sit down with Theodore's estate lawyer after the funeral? Did you go through all the documents? I met with him briefly, yes. He told me the house was in my name, that Theodore's life insurance had paid out, that there were some savings accounts. I signed some papers. Why? Because Theodore and I set up something very specific in the last 5 years before his death. Something he wanted to protect you with. Maggie, you need to come to my office right now. There are things you need to see. 2 hours later, I sat in Charlotte's downtown office, staring at documents spread across her massive mahogany desk. My hands were trembling as I tried to comprehend what I was reading. Theodore did all this without telling me? Charlotte nodded, her expression sympathetic. He wanted to surprise you. He was planning to reveal everything on your 45th wedding anniversary. But then the heart attack happened, and in the chaos of the funeral and your grief, I think the estate lawyer assumed you knew. He should have been more thorough in explaining everything, but you signed the documents, so he probably thought you understood what you were signing. I looked down at the papers again, reading through them with new eyes. Theodore hadn't just left me the house on Willowbrook Lane. Over the final decade of his life, he and Charlotte had been investing in real estate throughout Riverside Heights. Small purchases at first, a duplex here, a small commercial building there. But as their investments paid off, they'd expanded. By the time Theodore died, he'd accumulated a portfolio of 17 properties. Rental homes. Commercial spaces. A small strip mall. 2 apartment buildings. And he'd put everything into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. The total current value, Charlotte said gently, is approximately $8.3 million. I couldn't breathe. $8 million. Theodore was adamant that these properties stay in trust. He'd seen too many widows lose everything to probate, family disputes, or poor financial decisions made in grief. This trust protects everything. Derek can't touch it. No one can, except you. You control everything, the properties, the rental income, all of it. How much rental income? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. After property management fees, maintenance reserves, and taxes, you're netting approximately $42,000 per month. That's $500,000 a year, Maggie. You're not just comfortable, you're wealthy. Theodore made absolutely certain you'd never have to depend on anyone. I put my head in my hands, overwhelmed by waves of grief and gratitude. Theodore had done this for me. Had worked and planned and invested to ensure that no matter what happened, I'd be protected. And I'd been living in that house for 5 years not fully understanding that I was sitting on a fortune. There's more, Charlotte continued. The house on Willowbrook Lane isn't just in your name, it's protected within the trust structure. Even if Derek somehow managed to get a conservatorship, which he won't, the trust provisions explicitly prevent the sale of the primary residence without your written consent, verified by 3 separate witnesses and a psychiatric evaluation confirming your competence. Theodore thought of everything. He loved you, Charlotte said simply. And he knew how vulnerable widows can be to family pressure and financial exploitation. He wanted you armored against every possibility. I looked up at her, a new thought forming. Charlotte, if I wanted to leave the house. You could do whatever you want, Charlotte confirmed. You could sell it, rent it, burn it down if you felt like it, though please don't. But Maggie, I'm not sure I understand. Why would you want to leave? Derek is the one making demands. You have all the power here. Because it doesn't feel like my home anymore, I said quietly. Derek and Vanessa have tainted it. Every room reminds me of their betrayal. I don't want to stay there just to prove a point. But I also don't want them to have it. Charlotte's expression slowly transformed into a predatory smile. Tell me what you're thinking. Over the next hour, we developed a plan. Not just a defensive strategy, but a proactive approach that would leave Derek and Vanessa with exactly what they deserved, nothing, while giving me a fresh start and ensuring they could never try this with anyone else. It's ruthless, Charlotte warned. Derek will be devastated. Derek chose to be my adversary instead of my son, I replied. He made his choice. Now he gets to live with the consequences. The first step happened that evening. I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. New keys, new deadbolts, new security system with cameras covering every entrance. Derek's key would no longer work, and if he tried to enter, I'd have video evidence of trespassing. The second step came the next morning when I met with Charlotte's recommended attorney, Richard Chin, who specialized in elder law and estate protection. Mrs. Thornhill, I want to be very clear, Richard said after reviewing my situation. Your son and his girlfriend have no legal standing whatsoever. The threat about having you evaluated for competency is just that, a threat. To actually pursue it, they'd need to file for guardianship or conservatorship, which requires substantial evidence that you can't manage your own affairs. From what you've told me and what I'm observing, you're sharp, articulate, and clearly competent. But they said Vanessa's father is a real estate attorney. Who should know better than to pursue a frivolous legal action, Richard interrupted. If he does file something, we'll have it dismissed immediately, and we can pursue sanctions against him for wasting the court's time. More importantly, we can pursue harassment charges against both your son and his girlfriend for their threats and intimidation. I don't want to send my son to jail, I said quietly. You wouldn't be sending him to jail. You'd be establishing a legal record of his behavior. Trust me, Mrs. Thornhill, the moment he and his girlfriend realize you have competent legal representation and substantial assets they didn't know about, they'll back down. Bullies usually do when confronted with real opposition. The third step came 2 days later when Derek texted me, "Need to pick up rest of my things tomorrow at 2 p.m. I responded, "No. You are not welcome in this house. Your belongings will be placed on the curb at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Take them or they go to donation." His response came within seconds, "You can't do this. That's my property. And this is my house. 2 p.m., curb. Don't be late." The next afternoon, I had everything Derek had left behind: clothes, books, sports equipment, old furniture from his teenage years that he'd stored in the basement, packed into boxes and bags on the curb. I watched from my living room window as he pulled up in Vanessa's BMW, both of them getting out to survey the pile of belongings. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told the story. Vanessa was gesturing angrily at the house. Derek was on his phone, presumably trying to call me. I didn't answer. They loaded his belongings into the car with sharp, aggressive movements, and Vanessa made a point of looking directly at my living room window and mouthing something that looked very much like a profanity. I smiled and waved. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "This is Robert Carmichael, Vanessa's father and legal counsel. Your treatment of my future son-in-law constitutes harassment and potentially elder abuse, abusing him by your irrational behavior. We are proceeding with legal action to have you evaluated. Expect to be served papers within the week." I forwarded the text to Richard Chen with a note, "Is this what you meant by bullies exposing themselves?" His response came back within minutes, "Perfect. He just committed to a course of action in writing. This will be easier than I thought." But the fourth step, the big one, came a week later when I met with a structural engineer and a selective demolition company. "Mrs. Thornhill, I want to make sure I understand correctly," the engineer said, reviewing the plans I'd sketched out. "You want to remove everything that makes this house functional? All the fixtures, appliances, built-ins, everything that gives it value beyond the basic structure?" "Everything," I confirmed. "I want the copper pipes, the wiring that's worth salvaging, the antique fixtures, the custom cabinets, the hardwood floors, anything that has value and can be legally removed. I want this house reduced to studs and foundation. That's extensive. And expensive. I can afford it. Can you do it?" He nodded slowly. "It'll take about 3 weeks. But Mrs. Thornhill, why would you do this to your own home?" "Because it won't be my home for much longer," I said. "I'm leaving. And I'm taking everything of value with me." The fifth step was finding my new home. Charlotte showed me a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a luxury building downtown, part of a development she'd built 5 years ago. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, a modern kitchen that would have made Theodore weep with joy, and a building concierge who could help with anything I needed. "It's available immediately," Charlotte said. "And since it's one of my properties, you can have it at cost. Consider it a favor to Theodore's memory." "I'll take it." Over the next 3 weeks, I watched as crews systematically stripped my house of everything that made it a home. The custom kitchen cabinets Theodore had built by hand, removed and placed in climate-controlled storage. The antique light fixtures we'd collected over decades, carefully packed away. The hardwood floors, pulled up, refinished, and stored. Even the built-in bookshelves and the mantel over the fireplace. The copper plumbing was removed and sold for scrap, several $1,000s worth. The electrical wiring, same thing. The appliances were high-end and practically new, those went into storage for my new condo. Derek drove by twice during the demolition process. I wasn't there. I'd moved into my new condo and was watching the house through the security cameras I'd installed. Both times, he got out of his car and stared at the work crews with what looked like absolute horror. The third time he showed up, he came with Vanessa and an older man I assumed was her father, the attorney. They spoke to the foreman of the demolition crew. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I watched as the foreman pointed to the permits posted on the front door, then to me through the camera as I'd given him permission to do. Derek tried calling me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Finally, he sent a text. What are you doing to the house? I responded, exercising my property rights. It's my house, remember? You're destroying it. I'm removing my personal property. The house structure is fine. You wanted it so badly, now you can have it. Just as soon as you buy it from me for fair market value. The calls intensified after that. Derek, Vanessa, Robert Carmichael, they all tried to reach me. I forwarded every aggressive message to Richard Chen and continued ignoring them. 2 days before the demolition was scheduled to be complete, I finally received the legal papers Derek had threatened. Robert Carmichael had actually filed for an emergency guardianship, claiming I was engaging in destructive and irrational behavior indicating severe cognitive decline and inability to manage my own affairs. I took the papers to Richard Chen, who read them and actually laughed. This is the sloppiest legal work I've seen in years. He's grasping at straws and he knows it. We'll go to the hearing, you'll speak to the judge for 5 minutes, and this will be dismissed. But Mrs. Thornhill, I think it's time we revealed your full financial situation. Are you ready for that? More than ready. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, the demolition of everything valuable in the house was completed. What remained was a shell, walls, roof, foundation, and nothing else. No plumbing, no electrical beyond basic code requirements, no fixtures, no appliances, no flooring except concrete subfloor. It was technically still a house, but it would cost at least $200,000 to make it livable again. I listed it for sale the day after the demolition was complete. Price, $425,000, sold as is. The listing description was honest. Original 1990s ranch home sold as complete renovation project. Structure sound but requires all new systems, flooring, fixtures, and finishes. Perfect for contractor or investor looking for project with good bones in established neighborhood. Derek called me within an hour of the listing going live. This time, I answered. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Selling my house, I said calmly. I've decided you and Vanessa were right, it is too much for me to maintain. So I'm downsizing to a lovely condo downtown. Much more manageable for someone my age. You gutted it. The listing says it needs everything. Yes, well, I took my personal property with me when I moved. The fixtures, the appliances, the flooring, all of those were mine. The house itself is still perfectly good. Someone will buy it and renovate it into something wonderful. You did this to spite me. His voice was shaking with rage. You destroyed your own house just to keep me from having it. Derek, I didn't destroy anything. I removed my belongings and am selling my property. That's not spite, that's property ownership. Now, was there something else you needed? I have a guardianship hearing to prepare for. About that, Derek said, and I could hear him taking a breath, trying to regain control. Mom, I think we should talk before the hearing. Maybe we can work something out. Work what out? Call off the guardianship proceedings. Cancel the house sale. We can come to an arrangement. You can stay in the house, we won't push for you to move. We just want to make sure you're protected. I laughed, actually laughed. Derek, you don't want to protect me. You want to control my assets. But here's something you should know before we go any further. I'm not some helpless widow barely scraping by. Your father left me very well provided for. I don't need your protection, your intervention, or your concern. What do you mean, well provided for? I mean that between the trust your father established and my current income from rental properties, I'm worth approximately $8.3 million. I net about $42,000 per month in passive income. I can afford the best lawyers, the best medical care, and the best living situation I choose. The house on Willowbrook Lane isn't my only asset, Derek, it's just the one you knew about. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. You're lying, he finally said, but his voice was weak. I'm not. You can ask Charlotte Whitmore, your father's business partner. She's been managing the trust since Theodore died. Or you can ask Richard Chen, my attorney, who can provide you with documentation. But Derek, here's the truth. You threatened and bullied someone you thought was vulnerable. You tried to steal from someone you believed couldn't fight back. You aligned yourself with a woman who saw your mother as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. And now you're going to face the consequences of those choices. Mom, please. I'll see you at the hearing, I said, and hung up. The guardianship hearing took place on a Thursday morning in family court. I arrived with Richard Chen and Charlotte Whitmore, both dressed in expensive suits that screamed successful professionals. Derek came with Vanessa and her father, all three of them looking increasingly nervous as they watched my legal team set up. Judge Patricia Morrison was a woman in her 60s who, according to Richard, had a reputation for being extremely skeptical of guardianship petitions, especially those that appeared financially motivated. Robert Carmichael presented his case first. He argued that my sudden and destructive demolition of my home, my irrational decision to kick out my son, and my erratic behavior all pointed to cognitive decline requiring intervention. When it was Richard's turn, he stood and smiled. Your Honor, Mrs. Thornhill is here and prepared to speak for herself. I think 5 minutes of conversation with my client will demonstrate the absolute frivolity of this petition. But first, I'd like to enter into evidence the entire text message history between Mr. Derek Thornhill, Ms. Vanessa Carmichael, and Mrs. Thornhill, which clearly shows a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and attempted financial exploitation. He handed the judge a thick folder. I watched Derek's face go pale as Judge Morrison began reading through the messages, her expression growing increasingly stern. Mr. Carmichael, the judge said after several minutes, your son and his girlfriend told Mrs. Thornhill that she had lived her life and needed to get out of the way. They demanded she surrender her home to them. They threatened her with legal action when she refused. And you saw fit to file this petition based on that situation? Robert Carmichael cleared his throat. Your Honor, the messages may seem harsh, but they represent a family trying to address a difficult situation with an aging parent who did exactly what any competent property owner would do when faced with harassment, Judge Morrison interrupted. She removed someone from her home who was threatening her. She sold her property, which is her absolute right. She moved to a more manageable living situation. These are all rational, well-considered decisions. Mrs. Thornhill, would you like to address the court? I stood, and Richard had coached me on what to say, but in the moment, I spoke from my heart. Your Honor, I'm 70 years old, but I'm not incompetent. I'm not confused. I'm not in cognitive decline. What I am is a mother whose son decided he was entitled to my home simply because he wanted it. When I refused to surrender my property, he and his girlfriend threatened me, harassed me, and ultimately tried to use the legal system to take away my autonomy. My late husband, Theodore, spent the last decade of his life building financial security for me because he knew how vulnerable widows could be to exactly this kind of exploitation. He established an $8.3 million trust to ensure I'd never have to depend on anyone. He gave me property, income, and independence. I don't need a guardian. I need my son to recognize that I'm still a person deserving of respect, not an obstacle to be removed or an asset to be acquired. The house was mine to do with as I pleased. I chose to remove everything of value and sell the shell because I'd rather it go to strangers than to the son who betrayed me. I sat down, and Judge Morrison was nodding. Mrs. Thornhill, thank you for your statement. Mr. Carmichael, this petition is dismissed with prejudice. Not only is there no evidence of incompetence, but I'm frankly appalled that you filed this action based on what appears to be nothing more than a family property dispute. Mrs. Thornhill has demonstrated clear thinking, sound judgment, and appropriate responses to harassment. The judge looked at Derek and Vanessa. Mr. Thornhill, Ms. Carmichael, you should both be ashamed of yourselves. Elder financial abuse is a serious crime, and from these messages, you came dangerously close to committing it. If Mrs. Thornhill chose to pursue charges, you could face significant legal consequences. Your Honor, Robert Carmichael tried to interject, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. I'm not finished. Mr. Carmichael, as an attorney, you should have recognized this petition for what it was, an attempt to use the court system as a weapon in a property dispute. I'm referring this matter to the State Bar for review of your conduct. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down with a sound of finality that echoed through the courtroom. Derek tried to approach me as we left, but Richard stepped between us. Mr. Thornhill, any further contact with Mrs. Thornhill should go through my office. She's made her position clear. I walked out of that courthouse flanked by my legal team, and for the first time in months, I felt completely free. The house on Willowbrook Lane sold 3 weeks later to a young couple who were both contractors. They were thrilled to get a property in such a good location at below market value, even knowing the extensive renovation required. They paid $425,000 cash. With the help of Charlotte and Richard, I structured the sale proceeds into my existing trust, further protecting my assets. The total value of my estate was now approaching $9 million. I never heard from Derek again directly, though I heard through Patricia that he and Vanessa had broken up 2 months after the hearing. Apparently, once Derek couldn't deliver the house she'd been counting on, Vanessa lost interest in the relationship. Her father had been censured by the State Bar for his handling of the guardianship petition, and the family had distanced themselves from the entire situation. Derek had sent a letter through Patricia, which she forwarded to me with a warning that I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to. I almost threw it away. But late one night in my beautiful new condo, I opened it. "Mom," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever read this or if you'll care what I have to say. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, for listening to Vanessa, for threatening you, for treating you like an obstacle instead of my mother. I was so caught up in what I thought I deserved that I forgot to consider what you'd already given me. You took me in when I was broken, and I repaid your kindness by trying to take your home. I understand if you never forgive me. I'm not sure I forgive myself. I just wanted you to know that I'm ashamed of who I became, and I'm trying to figure out how to be better. Your son, Derek." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Part of me wanted to call him, to rebuild what we'd broken. But a larger part of me knew that some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. I wrote back, just once, "Derek, I appreciate your apology. I hope you do become better. But right now, I need distance and time. Perhaps someday we can have a relationship again. But that day isn't today. Take care of yourself. Mom." That was 8 months ago. Now, I sit in my condo overlooking the river, watching the sunrise paint the water gold and pink. I have coffee with Charlotte twice a week. I've joined a book club and started taking art classes. I've reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I'm 70 years old, and I'm happier than I've been in years. The house on Willowbrook Lane is beautiful now. I drove by last week and saw that the young contractors had transformed it into something modern and gorgeous. New family, new memories, new life. It's no longer mine, but I'm okay with that. It stopped being home the moment Derek asked me to get lost. So I did get lost from the pain, lost from the betrayal, lost from the version of myself that would have sacrificed everything to keep peace with a son who didn't respect me. And in getting lost, I found myself again. My son told me to get lost. So I left and took the house with me, piece by piece, board by board, every fixture and finish that held any value. I left him with nothing but an empty shell and a lesson he'll never forget: mothers aren't obstacles to be removed. We're not assets to be acquired. We're human beings deserving of respect, dignity, and the right to control our own lives until our very last breath. Derek wanted my house. Instead, he got exactly what he deserved, nothing at all except the knowledge that he destroyed his relationship with his mother through greed and entitlement. And me? I got my freedom, my independence, and the peace of knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. Was it worth losing my son over? I think about that question every day. But then I remember Vanessa's words: "You've lived your life," and Derek's agreement with them, and I know the answer. I didn't lose my son in this fight. I lost him long before, the day he decided my value was measured in real estate rather than in the decades of love and sacrifice I'd given him. The son I raised would never have treated me that way. The man who did wasn't someone I recognized anymore. So yes, I got lost. I got lost from Willowbrook Lane, from the house that held 40 years of memories, from the family dynamics that had become toxic and unsustainable. And in that loss, I found something far more valuable: my dignity, my autonomy, and my absolute right to live my life on my own terms. I'm 70 years old, independently wealthy, living in a beautiful home, surrounded by people who respect and value me. My son told me to get lost. Best advice he ever gave me.